Ben Simon, Ben Yamin. Also co-sponsors anonymously for the immediate refuah of Chaim Yosef Ari ben Miriam, and for the refuah shlema of Menachem Mendel ben Sarabatia and Dvorah Fega bas Rezel. Amen. And tonight's learning is also dedicated in the memory of Shua Polanski, Zal. May his neshama have an aliyah, and for the refuah shlema of Menachem Mendel ben Sarabatia and Dvorah Fega bas Rezel. And last but certainly not least, tonight's learning should be in the merit of the refuah shlema of the Gadol Ador of Steinman. Aaron Yudah Leib ben Kittel Fega should have a refuah shlema b'mehera, amen. So before we get started, let me just ask a quick question. How many of you are familiar with the idea of reincarnation being an authentic Jewish idea, and how many question that? Raise of hands. Yes, a Jewish idea? Not a Jewish idea? Not sure? Okay. Often people, particularly from Western countries, view reincarnation as being a belief which is primarily associated with the Far East. But the truth is that even though there are some minor opinions in traditional Jewish scholarship which question whether reincarnation is authentic Jewish belief, the vast majority of sources say that it is. And I can't go through all of the sources, but we'll cover just a few. One major source, of course, is the Zohar Kadosh. As you are probably familiar with, it's like the encyclopedia of Jewish mysticism. And the Zohar raises an interesting question, a seeming contradiction between two verses in the Torah. One verse in the Torah says that God will bring the iniquity of a person upon his children and his children's children to the third and the fourth generation. But there's another verse which says that God does not punish children on account of the sins of the parents. That's a contradiction. How do we reconcile these two seemingly contradictory verses in the Torah? So the Zohar says that they can be reconciled through the Jewish doctrine of reincarnation. And what it means is that the verse which talks about God not bringing the iniquity of a person on his children is certainly true. God does not punish innocent children for the misdeeds of the parents. However, the verse which talks about iniquity being transferred from one generation to the other, that is from the children to the third and the fourth generation, that's referring to reincarnation. And it's talking about the idea of there being one soul, where as a result of that person's misdeeds in this world, the transgressions of such a person could be rolled over from one lifetime to another, and to another, and to another. And it's interesting that it's mentioned there in the verse 4 generations. We'll talk about more of that later. But this would be one major source, and there are other sources like that in the Zohar which clearly talk about the idea of reincarnation. Just to clarify, of course, reincarnation is not the same as resurrection. Resurrection is a Jewish belief or not a Jewish belief? What is resurrection? What is reincarnation? Right? Resurrection is what we say in English for Tchias HaMesim, and I'm sure you know what Tchias HaMesim is. That is the revival of the dead, the idea that a person will die, be buried, and at some time in the future, this body decomposed under the ground will be reconstituted into a new body and come to life, ushering in the world to come, Olam Haba. Reincarnation, however, is not the same. It is the idea of a soul being brought back into a body, but through natural means. The soul would be born into this world through natural means. The person will live his or her life, die, and the soul could be brought back again, right? And again, and we'll discuss how many times that can happen in the different forms. Yeah.
For a few thousand years already, we're old souls. There's no new ones.
Well, hopefully we'll discuss that. Interesting point. Yeah. Yeah. Another source, which indicates that the belief in Gilgul and Shalmas and reincarnation is an authentic Jewish belief, is that of the Unkelus, Targum Unkelus. Targum Unkelus, as you know, was a Ger Tzedek, a righteous convert, and he lived in the times of the Talmud, and he became a rabbi of Talmudic stature, which was no lightweight, heavyweight. And several times in the Torah, when the Unkelus is translating from the original Hebrew in the text to Aramaic, which was the vernacular of the Jews of that time, he refers to death as a second death, a moisa tanina, a second death. And the commentaries understand that what he's referring to is certain scenarios where a person would die and be brought back to life again in the context of reincarnation. One of the instances it's talking there about is regarding Reuven. If you remember, the Torah talks about the transgression that Reuven committed. Do you remember what that is? He's accused of
changing that.
Yes, accused of having relations with his father's wife. And the Gemara explains, of course, he didn't actually have an act of intimacy with her, but rather when Yaakov's primary wife, Rachel, passed away, Yaakov put his bed in the tent of Rachel's maidservant. And that was an affront to the honor of Leah, Reuven's mother. It wasn't enough that rather than viewing my mother Leah, his first wife, as the primary wife, he chose Leah as his primary wife during the lifetime of Rachel. But after she passed away, he should then prefer Rachel's maidservant to my own mother, and therefore he criticized his father for doing that. And he moved his father's bed back from the tent of Bilhah to the tent of Leah. And the Torah considers his intermingling in his father's personal affairs as if he had actually committed adultery or had relations with his father's wife. But there, the verse talks about Reuven's dying and not living. The Targum explains that to mean, right, he'll die, but he won't live again. He will not have to be reincarnated because his transgression will be atoned for, and then he'll stay in the heavenly realm. But this will be another source for the Jewish belief in reincarnation. The idea that a soul, after departing, could be brought back into this world in the form of a body. Ramban, Nachmanides, is another very authoritative commentary who says reincarnation is an authentic Jewish belief. And he uses this idea to explain the quintessential question as to why righteous people suffer, right? Why good people have it bad. And he says the answer to this question of Job is as a result of reincarnation. There's a notion of a tzaddik ben Rasha, a righteous person who's the son of a wicked person. The Ramban explains this is referring to reincarnation. Somebody who appears to be righteous in a particular lifetime might actually suffer because they have to rectify misdeeds from a previous reincarnation. So the Ramban also says that reincarnation is an original Jewish idea. And there are many other such sources as well. I think I'll just conclude this part of the talk with the teachings of the Chafetz Chaim. Lest you think, well, maybe if you have the source of the Zohar and of the Ramban, maybe this is only part of the mystical, metaphysical strains of teachings in Judaism. But here you take a legalist like the Chafetz Chaim, who says it's clearly a Jewish idea, and anybody who argues with this idea is expressing heresy. It's not true. And he brings an analogy to demonstrate the point. He says, consider a person who left his hometown because he wanted to do business in some foreign land. He gets to the foreign land, he opens up shop, he conducts his business practices, but he doesn't have the most successful business. And before you know it, he takes out money, and he's loaning, and he's swindling. A few years go by, he realizes this is not what I had anticipated, so he decides to skip town, go back to his hometown. In the meantime, all of his creditors complain to the mayor. This person came, took from us money, skipped town, do something about it. So the king of that province sent word ahead to this person's hometown saying, this person owes a great debt to the people in our place where he comes from. Don't let him into the city until he comes back and pays the debt. So the person arrives at home, they close the bars to his own home city, and they say, you may not come home. First pay off the debt where you've left behind, then come home. So he says the same thing to the Chafetz Chaim. The soul is brought down into this world in order to achieve certain things. A person's given an opportunity to capitalize positively and do good things. A person has to refrain from transgressing and doing harmful things. If a person leaves this world after having accrued debt, message is sent ahead to his home, right? His hometown where he's going. And the gates could be barred and say, first go back, pay off your debt, have another try at what you did, rectify what you did wrong, and then you'll be admitted into the hometown, into the home country. The Chafetz Chaim says that this is an analogy to understand the Jewish belief in reincarnation as well. Yeah?
Even the Shimon by the Cruz, they do it for Moshe Rabbi.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Even the biggest deacon, they also believe
Yeah, that would fit into what you were saying before about Gilgulim, being a thousand, having it for thousands of years. But the truth is, you're referring to the teaching of the Arizal. And the Arizal writes that in our times, and that was 500 years ago or so, there are no new souls. They're all Gilgulim. But,
only that now, but everybody holds like that.
yeah, that's accepted position. Yeah, very good. So that being said, what's the purpose then? Well, what's the purpose of reincarnation? What's it all about? So I mentioned it until now in general terms, but let's go into a little more detail. One part of, or purpose of reincarnation is in order to give a soul an opportunity to take advantage of situations that the person did not take advantage of. So take, for example, a Jew. A man or a woman is brought down into this world, and there are certain commandments. Men have the commandments they do, women have others, some they share together. A person doesn't capitalize on the opportunity to fulfill these mitzvahs. For example, prayer. The person simply neglects prayer. Every mitzvah, every commandment that we do has an effect, a beneficial effect on our soul. And all of these mitzvahs together have a beneficial effect on the soul, which almost sculpture the soul like a key which would open a lock. If that soul has not been refined through the performance of the mitzvahs, that soul will not be able to open its place into the spiritual realm. The soul will therefore have to be brought back into this world and given the similar opportunities in order to see whether it will take advantage of the opportunity that it didn't take advantage of the first time around. What's that? We'll discuss. We'll get into more details. That would be one purpose of creation, of reincarnation. Another related purpose would be in order for a person to rectify misdeeds. A person was brought down into this world. Again, let's say Jewish or non-Jewish, all human beings have commandments that they have to do, prohibitions which they may not do. The person messes up big time. As a result of not only did he or she not refine the soul, but they actually damaged and bent the soul. And if you use the analogy of the key, even if you have a properly cut key, but it's bent, it's not going to fit into the lock and open the door, open the gate. So as a result of this, the soul can be brought back down into this world for the purpose of reincarnation. It's not really with the idea of punishing the soul. It's not a pleasant experience as far as Jewish teachings are concerned, having to be reincarnated. But it's not for punishment's sake. The purpose of reincarnation is to give that soul the opportunity to either make up what it didn't do or correct the bad things that it did. And it's interesting, some of the sources talk about deja vu being as a result of reincarnation. How so? What is deja vu? I think, has anybody here experienced deja vu? Most people experience, right? So Jewish mystical sources explain what deja vu is. Deja vu are junctures in time, which are these opportunities to correct misdeeds, things that we didn't take proper advantage of in previous reincarnations or that we messed up with. So when you have that feeling, I've been here, I know you, I've met you before, we've had some interaction, right? What's happening here is God is bringing souls together, they're intersecting in scenarios where they don't really remember the details, but it's the opportunity that they have to make up for some misdeed or to take advantage of something they missed out the first time around. And therefore, the sources say when a person is having these deja vu experiences, he or she shouldn't just brush them off and saying this is insignificant. Rather, this is an opportune moment to stop and think very clearly and be very careful to do as best as you can what you understand to be the right thing in the situation. Say the right word. Don't be offensive. Don't, do something which might be dishonest. And these are all junctures which are placed before us in order to rectify these types of situations. So these would be two reasons that are given as to the purpose of reincarnation. A more detailed understanding of the way that works is that the Jewish teachings tell us that even though we talk about the soul as one entity, in truth there are several levels to the soul. How many? 5. Yeah? We know the names of the different levels? Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, and Yechidah. Okay? These 5 levels of soul are interlinked like links in a chain. The highest being connected to God in the spiritual realm, the lowest being connected to the human being in the physical realm. And that's the venue, the conduit through which the breath of God is breathed into a human being, imparting life. And there's a hierarchy then of these different levels of soul. If you start from the lowest end, that's nefesh. Nefesh is the part of the soul that comes to rest in the physiology of the human body. And that's what nefesh actually means, to come to rest. Like we say regarding Shabbos. Shabbos comes in and we say Shabbat Vaina Vash. Nefesh, coming to rest. Above that level of soul, which connects to the body, is responsible for energizing our physical activities, having to do with the physical plane. Above that you have Ruach. Ruach is described sometimes as the spirit. That's the moving column of air. And that's what animates a person, giving us our ability to speak, our power of speech, and also our emotions, motivating us. That's the level of soul of Ruach. Above that you have Neshama. Neshama is the plane of soul which is responsible, connected to intellect. So you have Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, physical body, soul, speech, and thought. Above that, you have the two higher levels of soul, Chaya and Yechidah. Chaya, life, Yechidah, singularity or oneness. That's already describing very high levels of God's being the source of all life and being the unique progenitor of all. The three levels of soul which are connected to our physical, emotional, verbal, and intellectual planes are ones which are most closely connected to the Torah that we learn and the mitzvahs that we do, and they're going to be the most affected therefore by the mitzvahs that we perform or the averos, the transgressions which we transgress, God forbid. The first time a soul is brought down into this world, a person is given the opportunity to perfect these three levels of soul: nefesh, ruach, neshama. If they do that, they perfect the soul. The person would then transpire from this world and go into the next. People might say, death, that's unfortunate, that's unhappy. But in such a case, that's not true. The soul has accomplished its mission here. The soul staying in this world any longer than necessary is actually suffering for the soul. And therefore it's a great time of joy for the soul to be released from this realm and rejoin God in its source. If a person doesn't rectify these three levels of soul, nefesh, ruach, neshama, action, speech/emotion, and intellect, by the time a person dies, the soul will be going to the soul world. If reincarnation is required, what will happen then is the person is given the opportunity to perfect only one level at a time. First, nefesh. After that, ruach, right? And then neshama. Chai and yechidah, being levels of the soul which are transcendental, much close to God, are not subject to the experience of reincarnation. Okay? But nefesh, ruach, and neshama are, having to do with our plane of action, speech, and thought. And if a person doesn't rectify what they need to do the first time around, then they're given three opportunities. One for nefesh, one for ruach, one for neshama. Each time a person would perfect one of those levels, the person would die. Why? He's achieved the maximum potential for this lifetime. The soul would then be liberated and brought down again next time for the next level of soul. Is it clear? Yeah? We're going to fine-tune this as we go along a bit later when we're talking about how many times, in fact, can a soul be reincarnated in what different forms. But the basic format is an initial lifetime, the guf rishon, and then you have three reincarnations. If the person doesn't correct all three nefesh, ruach, neshama the first time, then nefesh, ruach, neshama for a total of 4. Yeah.
Why would you want to complete the mission?
Because doing so means death. Yeah. The answer is because it means death in this worldly terms, but it means life in the true eternal spiritual terms. And when the person would correct, for example, nefesh, what they would be doing is actually graduating to the next step. Yeah. Why would you want to graduate elementary school if afterwards you have to go to junior high? Why would you graduate junior high if you have to go to senior high? But a person who's interested in education will want to do that. So that's what's happening here. The soul is graduating, as it were, from stage to stage, elevating towards the ultimate purpose. This whole topic raises another interesting question, which is, we spoke earlier about reincarnation and also resurrection. Reincarnation being the return of a soul to a body through natural birth. Resurrection being the revitalizing of the body at the resurrection of the dead. But that seems to be somewhat of a contradiction, meaning the question would be, how does Judaism on the one hand believe in reincarnation, where a soul can occupy several bodies, and if that's the case, which of the bodies will be resurrected? Yeah? Anybody heard any discussion about this? Yeah. Yeah, that's also true. That's also true. Yeah, that's also true. We'll cover that later on. But here the question is, if on the one hand we believe in reincarnation, the soul can occupy several bodies, so in the end of the day, at resurrection, because it may seem which of these bodies are going to be resurrected. Any ideas? What are your thoughts? Good question? What's that? Say it again.
The young body.
Yeah, the young body. Let's hope so. But that's covered for, because the Gemara asks, are we resurrected as we die or as healthy young 20-year-olds? And there are different opinions, but at the end of the day, one says you're resurrected as Adam was created from the dust, so a person who's resurrected from the dust will be resurrected in his prime, the age of 20. Anybody over the age of 20 here? You told me your age. Yes, I know you're younger than 20. Yeah, so you're okay. But the others of us over 20 were past our prime. In any case, the one opinion who says we'll be resurrected as we were when we died, nevertheless, there will be a miraculous restoration of health. So that even a 70-year-old who might have been an amputee will nevertheless be restored to the way he or she was at the age of 20. In any case, so we'd be covered on those bases. The Gemara asks this question: if we have reincarnation on the one hand and resurrection on the other, which of the bodies will be resurrected? So the Zohar brings different opinions. According to one opinion, it doesn't really matter who started the process, it's who completed it. If completion is perfection of the soul, that means that the body that was responsible for perfecting the soul is the one who should be resurrected. And that would mean, therefore, that the last body that this soul occupied would be the body that would be resurrected. According to another opinion in the Zohar, it's actually the first body that will be resurrected. Why? Because we said it's the first time around which gives the person the opportunity to perfect nefesh, ruach, neshama. If they didn't do that, then reincarnation would result, giving a person the opportunity to work on each level separately. But when that's done, it's ultimately for the purpose of returning to the original state, what should have been accomplished the first time around. And therefore, even though later bodies might accomplish the task, it's the first body that gets resurrected. The Rizal actually takes the following approach, which is, it's a joint effort. So any body that was responsible for the progress of this soul, getting it to its final state of perfection, will be resurrected, will merit having its part in that state of the world to come. Let's say a person was reincarnated 20 times. Maybe 12 of those bodies helped promote the soul's progress. Those 12 bodies would be resurrected. So this is a bit eerie. That means that you've got like 12 bodies occupied by one soul. And the body as we know it is certainly very inferior, but without going into much detail, that would be the topic of another discussion. The resurrected body will be much more like a soul than it is a body. Compare it to a light bulb. When that light bulb is off, you see the body of the bulb and you see the filament inside it, but you see a body of a bulb. When you turn that light on, you don't relate to it as a bulb anymore. You can't see the body of the bulb. You see the barest wisp of glass. And inside, rather than the filament, you see brilliant light shining from within. And so that's going to be the difference between the body as we know it and the resurrected body. That soul is going to be brilliantly burning within a person so much that you're not even going to see each other's bodies. You're just seeing glow and maybe the barest wisp of a body. So here you'll have these 12 resurrected bodies, and they'll all be animated by one soul. By one soul. How can that be? So the Arizal explains based on a teaching in the Gemara which says, Ner chad ner le'elef. There's a quality of light that if you have one candle, it can be used to light 1,000 candles without diminishing its own light. So too, the soul can illuminate many, many bodies without being diminished at all. And this soul can therefore animate all those 12 bodies. And these 12 bodies are so uniquely connected that they're not even viewed as separate bodies, but more like separate parts of one body. Kind of like we have legs and arms and different body parts, but they're all animated by one soul. So these bodies, which are associated with that soul, will be one cohesive unit for that soul. An interesting question, but that was more of a side point. Yeah.
Could that be today too? Could one soul illuminate a lot of bodies? Because there's a lot more people today than there was.
Yeah.
100,000 years ago. So where are all the souls coming?
That's touching on something which I also hope to get to soon, but I don't want to put your question off, and so I think that the closest we can get to that type of thing today is the idea of a root soul being divided into splinter souls, so that you can actually have one soul animating many different bodies. Not that the soul is resurrected there, but rather a soul is splintered into separate souls associated with that root soul, and they occupy many different people. And that's one of the reasons that's used to describe spiritual affinity that people have, because they have the same root souls. You quoted the teaching which talks about 600,000 souls. 600,000 souls of Israel at Sinai. That's referring to the men. But of course there were 600,000 female counterparts, so that it wasn't that there was really. So why doesn't it just say 1,200,000 souls? Why does it say 600,000? Because the truth is there were 600,000 souls. According to Jewish mystical teachings, right? It's a male and a female soul are not separate souls. They're two halves of one soul. So the number 600,000 at Sinai is not really just referring to the men. It's referring to the men and the women, the soulmates. But those very powerful, intensely brilliant souls at Sinai were split over time and shared by many, many different people. And the result of that is a certain spiritual affinity of certain people because they come from the same family. Sometimes, even though it should be expressed as an affinity, a draw, an attraction, that's not always the case. If you take, for example, a magnet, you have a plus charge and a minus charge. They say opposites attract, plus and minus, plus repel, right? Plus repel, which means that, this is maybe a bit of a tangent, but another interesting point is that these souls that come from the same root souls and should have an affinity often actually are repelled one from the other because of their similarity. And let me give you an example. Think about two guys, in high school. And they're very competitive and they don't really get along and they're constantly like bickering and arguing, and it might get so intense that they actually like get into a huge fight and they're knocking each other But it happens sometimes that after that fight they become friends and they become like the greatest of friends. Anybody ever have that? I had that in my own life. And the reason for this is because each one saw himself in the mirror, and the similarity is frightening if a person doesn't know how to deal with it. And that results in a type of repulsion. The way to rectify that would be to turn oneself around, rearrange one's perspective, find the good points in the other person, and then there's actually an attraction. And so that can often be the case. Two people can have an initial tension with one another, but in reality, it's a tension that can be resolved, and they can use that to actually create a very great friendship. They might be coming from the same root soul. We're still in the point about the purpose of reincarnation. A third reason for the purpose of reincarnation is to perfect other people. This could be another reason for reincarnation. We talked about perfecting oneself, either to make up for things a person didn't do, or to correct misdeeds that a person transgressed. You can also have a third scenario where the person did all of the mitzvos and didn't do any transgressions. This person is a tzaddik. Nevertheless, the tzaddik is reincarnated. Why would that be? Reincarnation, as we said, is not a pleasant experience in Judaism. The soul would much rather be rectified here and stay in the spiritual realm, continue its ascent there. The righteous should be punished by having to return and have another go at it. The explanation that's given is the righteous people led their entire lives sacrificing their own comforts for other people's spiritual benefit. They went without sleep, they went without food. Very often they sacrificed their own family life, and encounter all types of difficulties, all for the purpose of helping other people grow. And therefore, these souls will be willing to sacrifice the experience in Gan Eden in order to be reincarnated here and help other people along the way. And therefore, this could be another reason why people are reincarnated. Because as perfected souls, they're brought down here again to help other people achieve the reason for which they were reincarnated. And a fourth interesting reason given as to why reincarnation takes place is for the purpose of zivugim, which is soulmates, right? What does it have to do with soulmates? Remember what we just said a few minutes ago, that in Jewish teachings you don't have a male soul and a female soul. You have one soul which is which has both a male and female component. That soul is divided and put into a male and female body. The prototype for all of this was Adam, the first man with a capital M, mankind, who was actually a composite of both male and female. As you know, our sources tell us that Adam and Eve were actually initially created as one composite unit that we refer to as man. God separated Eve from Adam. From what part of his body? Yes? The side. Was it a rib or was it a side? So the common misconception is a rib. But the actual Hebrew in the original Torah text implies, and that's how the Talmud explains it, that she was actually separated from his side. They were created together as one unit, side by side. She wasn't a smaller part removed from him in the form of a rib, but they were like Siamese twins. They were merged as in one composite being of both male and female. And he separated God, the female from the male, and the male from the female, right? For the purpose of bringing them together. How can the unity of two separate parts be greater than the original unity of one? The answer is that even though there's a great degree of unity in the fusion of two, but if you're able to take two disparate things and connect them, that actually has a greater degree of connection and unity than when they're created as one. Right? It's one thing to have something which is one. But if you take two things and make them one, that's actually a greater degree of unity. So the idea here is that God separated man and woman, who were created side by side. The Gemara actually explains it was back to back, kind of like this. And God separated them, right? Eve from the side of Adam. So they became separate. When they turn towards each other, right, they can achieve an even greater degree of unity than there was before that separation. So this prototype of the unity of male and female in Adam and the separation of Eve is also important here, because these souls which are separated into two bodies are helpmates, like the Torah says. Helpmates, what does a helpmate mean? Not somebody who makes a bed or does the cooking or brings in the livelihood. That's all important. But more importantly, a helpmate means a spiritual helpmate. These two people are earmarked for each other in order to help each other attain his or her perfection. If a person doesn't meet his or her soulmate, or the soulmates might meet, but they live a lifestyle which is about cooking each other's breakfast, but not being in tune with each other's emotional, intellectual, and spiritual needs, then these souls will not be perfected. Which means after 120 years, as they say, of joint living, these souls are not going to be perfected. They will have to be reincarnated in some scenarios, and in which case, right, one soul is required to come down. It cannot achieve the perfection it needs without the other soul being reincarnated as well. And so that the whole purpose in life would be for each reincarnated soul, again, right, to find that match in order for each to be able to achieve the types of things that we're talking about. You know, they have these necklaces, the her necklaces, a heart, and each one is cut, right? And there's a unique pair, right, that fit. So that's what we're talking about here. There's a unique male and female component of one soul, which has a unique fit, and each person is trying to find his or her soulmate. The formula for doing that, and there's a whole nother discussion we can have about the metaphysics of matchmaking, but the main thing is, like, the extent to which a person refines his or her soul, the more likely he or she is to find the soulmate. And a person should be praying for his soulmate. Not just to find it, as people do. God, please help me find my soulmate. But God, give me the light, the wisdom, the understanding, the inspiration, the sensitivity to perfect my own soul. And while I'm doing so, please do the same thing for my soulmate. Because even if I'm working and I'm supposed to be doing, but she's not, or vice versa, it's not going to happen. So therefore, praying for one's soulmate doesn't mean, God, help me find my soulmate. God, help each of us perfect ourselves to the point where we'll be actually ready to meet each other as quickly as possible. But this would be the fourth reason for reincarnation, in order to help souls reconnect with their soulmates, and that is necessary in order to achieve the type of perfection that's needed. Yeah.
So, I know that the soul has different parts, right? But so when you pass away and you're going through the whole concept of judgment, etc., and then eventually you're going to Gan Eden or the next level, whatever that is. So the whole aspect of reincarnation tied to that aspect, like what is one portion stays up, the soul stays up there, and one goes down.
Yeah, excellent. If I understand your question, it seems as you're almost asking, how does reincarnation fit into the afterlife?
Yes.
So reincarnation really, in my understanding, is a form of the afterlife. The afterlife has many stages. One stage would be reincarnation. The general idea would be as follows: that a person dies, the soul is liberated from the body. A decision has to be made whether that soul will be elevated in the spiritual realm, and if so, in what direction, through what venue. There's Gan Eden, there's Gehinnom. One of the options is Gilgul, reincarnation. And therefore, the decision, which we call it judgment, the soul is judged, but really what's happening is that the decision is being made, what needs to be done with this soul in order for it to continue its spiritual trajectory for growth. Sometimes it might be going into Gan Eden, heaven. Sometimes it might be going into Gehinnom, what we call hell, which is not punishment, it's purification. Sometimes the soul might not merit going either here or there, but rather go back down into the physical world in the body, and that would also be a form of the afterlife. In that scenario, the afterlife of this person is to come back to life in this world.
So what happens to all the deeds in this world?
That's a good point, and what we spoke about earlier about if a person doesn't perfect the first time around, then he works on nefesh, ruach, neshama. All of the progress that a person's made is stored for that soul, so that when he or she is reincarnated to work on the next level, that cannot be lost. That's stored for the person, and then he works on the next level of the soul. But in any case, when reincarnation takes place, it's not that part of the soul remains there, other than the normal connection of chaya and yechidah through neshama and ruach and nefesh. Yeah.
So what's better for a soul, to go to Gehenna or to come back to the world?
Better to go to hell than to be reincarnated. But we spoke about how the tzaddikim are willing to undergo a life of hell here, like we said, compromising sleep, food, physical comforts for the purpose of helping other people. The soul would much rather stay even in that part of the spiritual realm than to come back here. And again, it's important to recognize, in Judaism, the concept of Gehinnom, translated into English in a poor translation as hell, is not spitefully punish the person for messing up. That's not the point, right? That's not the point. Think about an analogy of a person, a football player, He goes down to the football field. If he's playing a real good game, he's going to end that game, dirty. What can he do? He could sit in the sidelines, but he doesn't want to be benched. He wants to be on the field. But if you're on the playing field, you're going to fall. And you're going to get your jersey dirty, right? You're going to show up in the next game with a dirty jersey? That's not right. So what do? Throw the jersey in the washing machine. And I don't think it's very pleasant. I wouldn't want to be rumbling and tumbling inside a washing machine. But that's needed in order to cleanse the guy's jersey for the next game. And the same thing we're talking about here. That in order to continue, playing the game, that soul has to be laundered. And the purpose, while that laundering is not pleasant, the purpose is not the pain, it's the purification. And that's what's actually good about Gehenna. Nobody wants to go there, but a soul would rather be there than have to come back and make a go of it here again.
But wouldn't they have to come back because they have to be, they're cleansed because they didn't.
So you're right, and that's part of the judgment.
Yeah.
Whether whether it's enough for the soul to stay in that realm for its purification, or whether it actually comes down here. Yeah.
It only mean Gehenna for 1 year, no?
Yeah, but what's a year? And that's not a place where there's really time. But you're right that there is a very good. The concept is that there's a limit to how long that can go for. And what happens is that the soul, you're raising a very good point. That's exactly the point here. Very good. Appreciate that. That you have, again, this would be a topic maybe for another discussion, but you have heaven, upper heaven, lower heaven, Gan Eden, upper and lower. You have Gehinnom, upper and lower. Our sources say that each has 7 chambers for a total of 14, and the soul is actually elevated from one to the other. The lower 7 stages of Gehinnom to the upper 7 stages of Gehinnom, and from that point they would go to the lower stages of Gan Eden, and it's all part of the soul's progress. Because a person will not suffer forever. The purpose of God is not to spite the person, but to help the person purify. Go ahead.
This that is a place not Gehenna and not Gehenna and the Shuma like
Yeah.
lies around that.
So we're going into the twilight zone, and well, that would be more like the afterlife. But there's Kafakele, and but let's leave that out of the equation for now, just because of a lack of time. So, just some thoughts that might be types of proofs for the idea of reincarnation. One of them touches on what you said before, which is that our sources tell us that there are 600,000 souls. We spoke about how those are actually 600,000 root souls with a male and female components. So you yourself made the point that there are many more Jews in any generation than 600,000. And when you count the collective amount of Jews that have been from generation to generation, you certainly have much more than 600,000. So where are those souls coming from? Right? And even if you factor in that there are splinter souls, so that there could be many more than 600,000, there must be some limit. Otherwise it goes on and on and on and on and on. What could be the final end? So the sources bring a teaching in the Talmud which says that En ben David ba ad sheyichalu kol neshamos shebaguf. Translated as, right, Ben David, who is Mashiach, will not come until all of the souls have been depleted from what's called the guf. Does anybody know what a guf is? Body? Yeah. Rashi explains that there is a repository of souls in the spiritual realm, and it's called the guf, the body. Just like a body contains one soul, there's a spiritual realm which contains all of the souls of the body of humanity. And the teaching tells us that Mashiach cannot come until all of those souls have been depleted. What does that mean? That implies that there's a finite number of souls, and all of those souls have to go through their rectification. Mashiach cannot come until the body of humanity has been perfected, and that applies to Jews and non-Jews as well. And therefore, that tells us that there must be an idea of reincarnation. If there's a finite number of souls, then there must be a scenario where souls are returning. And the depleting of these souls from that repository called the guf is about souls being brought down here, going back, having to come back down again and again until all of that rectification takes place so that the cup's empty. No more souls to reckon with. Mashiach, please, make your entry. So this is one of the ideas associated with the fact that there's reincarnation. There are many different teachings, right, which talk about what the qualifications for Mashiach coming. But at least this particular teaching indicates this idea of reincarnation. And it's true that the Rizal writes, this is 500 years ago, that nowadays most souls are reincarnated souls. Most souls are reincarnated. We're not original souls. We're here to rectify something. And we'll talk shortly about maybe how a person could know what he or she needs to rectify. But this idea of reincarnation also is used to explain other things. For example, why the righteous suffer, we spoke about before. Why the righteous suffer is because they have to rectify things which might have been done wrongly in a previous reincarnation. The Gemara talks about a tzaddik ben Rasha, a tzaddik, a righteous person who's the son of a wicked person. This tzaddik ben Rasha, the righteous person, the son of a wicked person, the Gemara says, suffers. The Gemara asks, how can he suffer? Why is he suffering on account of his parent? Right? He's a tzaddik, his father was a Rasha, what has one to do with the other? So the Ben Ish Chai actually explains that a tzaddik ben Rasha doesn't mean a tzaddik who is the biological son of a Rasha. What it means is a tzaddik who is the son of the spiritual inheritor of his father, which is the soul in the previous lifetime. And therefore that makes sense of the Gemara. A righteous person who's suffering is a tzaddik ben Rasha. He's a tzaddik now, but his soul is actually the product of a wicked person that this person's soul occupied, right, in the previous lifetime. So this would be used to explain why righteous people suffer. Another problem that reincarnation is used to address is children dying at a young age. We ask the question, children die at a young age, stillborns, lo leinu, infants, children who are free of sin, dying. How can this be? Where's the justice in all that? Why should that happen? There's an interesting midrash which talks about how the Rebbe Meir, whose wife was Bruria is known throughout Torah teachings as being a very wise woman. In this particular midrash, what happens is that Rebbe Meir was in the yeshiva davening on Shabbos, and his two sons, who were at home with his wife Bruria, they died. In order to spare Rebbe Meir the anguish of knowing that his children died on Shabbos, she hid the children, and when he came home, he asked, "Where are the boys?" She said, "Well, they're somewhere, and we'll find them at some point." So this happened throughout Shabbos. She deflected him several times. Finally, Shabbos came out, and he says, "Bruria, where are the boys?" She said, I'll tell you, but something happened, and I want to ask your opinion. She said, "We have a neighbor. Years ago, she deposited a certain object by me for safekeeping. She said, 'Guard this for me.' Several years went by, and it was by me. All of a sudden, she shows up, and she claims the object back. So I have to give it to her? It's been by me so long. Isn't it mine?" He says, "No, of course not. You guarded it. It was in your hands for safeguarding. Part of that means returning it to the rightful owner when he comes to claim it." So she said, "Rabbi Meir, listen to the wisdom of your words. You should know. God gave us two wonderful children as a deposit. But these children, their souls belong to God. And God is the owner of these souls. He came to claim them from us. Shall we hold them back, withhold them from God, or recognize that God's souls He has the right to take?" And then at that point, he made the blessing God, praising Him for His wisdom, and justifying what for us seems to be harsh judgments, but realizing that God does everything for best. And the Midrash says that he was consoled. The Ben Ish Chai says, in the end of the day, well, how is that a consolation? It's true that God owns the souls, God gives them, and God takes them. But the question here was, these were not adult souls, these were young, innocent children. Why should their lives have been taken? So the Ben Ish Chai explains that the wise Bruria was actually using the analogy of a pikadon, a deposit. Because a pikadon, he says, is referring to the way in which a soul comes into the body for the first time, given the opportunity to rectify nefesh ruch neshama. She says, these souls are pikadon. But if they died at a young age, it's an indication that this was not their first time around. They were here at this young age. Just the experience of being in this world alone was enough to rectify their souls, and they were taken at a time that seems to us to be before their time. But in fact, we have to know that they were here because of reincarnation for a limited, specific time. That goal was accomplished, and therefore they were taken. And it's important to know, lo aleinu, none of us should know mourning. But when a person dies, a close relative departs from this world, we have to know that everything comes from Hashem, and we're sorry to lose the person here, but we have to be happy about the fact that this soul is progressing in the spiritual realm. And another point that reincarnation addresses is birth defects. Things like autism, for example. Jewish sources discuss how reincarnation can actually be a reason behind autism. Why is this? A very elevated soul might have to be brought back into this world to rectify only very small things. This soul is reincarnated into the body of a person who might be limited, or a child or a person who is mentally disabled, and therefore not liable for the mitzvahs one way or the other. And just the experience of being in the physical world gives them the kind of rectification they need to be elevated. And therefore, it's actually told about the Chazon Ish, I believe, that when he came into the presence of a handicapped child, an autistic child, he would actually stand up in honor of that soul, because he recognized that what people believe to be a limited soul is actually not true at all. It's a very high soul. And there is an actual idea that these souls, because they're so elevated, can communicate things into this world which are not considered to be proper to reveal openly. And therefore God places these souls in bodies which cannot properly communicate in order that these secrets should be kept. And great sages would actually show respect for these souls by standing in their presence. Questions, comments? We started a bit late, so to get the full hour, we'll continue. Feel free to keep asking questions, and I'll also stay afterwards to answer questions if you'd like.
What's with the cats in the door?
We'll get there. What are some of the experiences in reincarnation? Generally speaking, a soul is not aware, a person is not aware of his soul being reincarnated. And the reason for this is because when a soul is reincarnated, not as a cat, as a dog, but as a human being, that human soul fits very naturally into a human body, and therefore it becomes part of that body, and in most cases the soul is not really aware consciously of being a reincarnation. We did speak about déjà vu experiences, where the person is given flashes of junctures indicating things need to be rectified, but generally speaking the person is not aware of being reincarnated. There are stories of great righteous tzaddikim who were able to see beyond the physical facade of the body, and they could actually get glimpses of the soul, and they could see the reasons why people were reincarnated and give them practical advice about what they have to do or avoid doing wrong. The Arizal, for example, is recorded as doing this time and time again. Rav Chaim Vital, his major Talmud, his disciple, his Talmud Muvhak, describes many, many scenarios where they were walking together, they would come to a particular place, and the Arizal would see certain things about people, and he was able to use that knowledge to help them with their spiritual growth. Most people nowadays are not able to do that. But that being said, the experiences that a person has here are affected by what happened in previous reincarnations, even if the person is not aware of it. There's a famous story about the Baal Shem Tov, where there was a Jew who had a bad go in life. He didn't have a lot of material bounty. He wasn't very healthy. He was married, but his shalom bayis was horrible. Yeah, he suffered. He wasn't healthy. So this went on for years, and finally his friends, his peers told him, look, there's a great tzaddik, the Baal Shem Tov. They say he can see things. Why don't you go, right? Why don't you go to him and see if he can help you? So he went to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov said to him, listen, I can't help you, I'm sorry. But I'm going to send you to a certain place, and you look there for a certain person, and hopefully, right, he'll help you. So the Baal Shem sent to a certain town, and in those days, no modern transportation. Everything was by foot, or by horseback, or by carriage. He takes a week or 2 week journey to find this place. He comes to a particular town, and he says to somebody he meets there on the outskirts of town, I'm looking for the house of so-and-so, the person that the Baal Shem Tov told him to look for. The person that he spoke to just heard the mention of this guy's name. He started spitting and cursing, and he ran away, he walked away. The guy's bewildered. The Baal Shem Tov is telling me to get an answer from a person who at the mention of his name, people spit and they curse. Right? What's that all about? He figured it was a mistake. He went into town. Again, he asked, where's the house of so-and-so? the person had the same type of response. Finally, one way or the other, he got to the person's house, right? He knocks on the door. I'm looking for so-and-so. Slams the door in his face. He's beside himself. He doesn't understand what's going on here. So he pleads to the person inside the house. He says, listen, I've come a long way. The Baal Shem Tov sent me. I'm looking for so-and-so. Please help me. Give me an answer. Why is everybody acting this way? He says, listen, the person that you're looking for is dead. But you should know that this guy was the most wicked, mean, nasty person. He was wealthy. He had plenty of money. But when poor, needy people asked him for help, he disparaged them and disrespected them and treated them like dirt. Everybody in the town hates this guy and curses at the mention of his memory. So the guy's like perplexed. How can this be? He has no choice but to go back to the Baal Shem Tov. He tells him the story and says, Rabbi, please explain to me what this is all about. How did you think that person would give the answer to my question? So the Baal Shem Tov looks him square in the eyes and he said, you should know that person that you were looking for was you. You are a reincarnation of that wicked person. And if you think that you're suffering now poverty and you're suffering disrespect and suffering many different ways, it's not non-deserving. Think about the things you were told that you did in the previous reincarnation. This is what you have to rectify. Chills went up and down the person's spine. He took the words of the Baal Shem Tov to heart. He tried as hard as he could to rectify himself and perfect himself. I don't know in the story whether he ever became the most wealthy guy in the world, but his situation was improved. A person's situation in life, even if he's not aware of it, is affected by what he did in the previous reincarnation. And his station is affected by that. And a person has to recognize that all of the challenges that he has are about rectifying these things. And the way to rectify it is not to rebel and ask why, but the way to rectify it is, what does God want me to do with this challenge? What's the productive, practical way to improve myself, my family, my neighbors, the world, by acting in this situation? This is the way of rectifying things from previous reincarnations. That being said, our sources tell us that regarding Torah learning, a person should seek out learning the areas of Torah that he or she enjoys. Ein adam loimed ela makom shelibo chafetz. The mystical teachings tell us that a person has a longing to learn certain types of Torah because that's lacking from his previous reincarnation. Some people like Gemara, some people can't relate to it at all. Some people like halacha, some people like, that's not for me. Some people like midrash, some like chumash. Every different type of people like different types. The mystical teachings say, we're told by the sages in the Talmud to pursue the type of Torah learning that you're drawn to because that's rectifying the Torah that you've missed out in previous reincarnations. There's a famous story, again, about the Arizal and the Al-Sheikh. In those times in Sfat, the Arizal had a group of Talmidim, the Gur Aryeh. Yes, the students of the Arizal. And these were the illustrious sages of Sfat in the 1500s. There was a great Torah sage there named Moshe Al-Sheikh. And he wanted very much to become part of that secret group of mystics surrounding the Arizal. And he was, what's that? The Al-Sheikh HaKadosh. And he was a great Torah scholar in his own right. He approached the Arizal asking whether he could join the club. And the Arizal said, no. You have rectified what I have to teach in a previous reincarnation. Your tikkun in this reincarnation has to be learning Chumash. And that became the source of the Al-Sheikh's commentary on the Chumash, which of course is considered to be one of the greatest commentaries in the Chumash to this day. And therefore, this is a mystical explanation of the Talmud, which tells us learning what a person desires. On the other hand, in the realm of performing mitzvos, those things that a person finds most challenging and difficult, those are the things that need rectificating. You find it hard to wake up in the morning to daven? It's a sign that in a previous reincarnation you might not have taken getting up early to daven very seriously. And now you're challenged by that. Overcoming that challenge is what needs to be done. And that's based on a teaching in the Talmud where certain people are asking another sage, I think it was Rav Yosef, what was your father careful? What was he particularly meticulous about performing? And they explained that was an indication of what a person needs to rectify in previous reincarnations. Yibum is another interesting example having to do with reincarnation. Yibum is the Torah mitzvah, which is translated in English as a Levirate marriage. I don't know why it's called a Levirate marriage, but in any case, it's describing a scenario where a person marries a particular woman. For as long as they're married, they have no children. The man dies, leaving a widow who is childless. The Torah tells us in such a scenario that if this deceased man, husband, has a brother, that brother is required to marry the deceased widow's, right, the deceased husband's wife, the widow. And the son that they will have will be named or perpetuate the name of the deceased. And this is the mitzvah of Yibum. The Ramban asks, how can the Torah say unequivocally that this couple who performs the mitzvah of Yibum will have a son? Maybe it'll be a daughter. So he answers, what happens here is that the soul of the departed husband is actually reincarnated into the son of this Yibum couple. And therefore, the child will be a boy. I don't know whether statistically anybody's ever done any research on that, but that's what the Ramban says.
You know the mosque. The person does the mosque.
Right, I want to go into the details of the halachas of Yibum, but this is the general pattern of Yibum. And that means then that the child, according to this, of the Yibum marriage is actually a living proof of reincarnation right before your very eyes. And the Peleoetz actually writes that in the case of Yibum, the people who knew the deceased husband are actually required to tell the child, the son, based on their knowledge of the deceased, what he needs to do to rectify his lifetime. Because they knew what he did good and what he didn't do good, and they're required to instruct him. So this would be a palpable living example of reincarnation according to Jewish teachings right in front of a person's eyes. We want to continue a little bit more. We did start late, and I think we've done about an hour, but the rabbi also said that I should go over if you're interested. I can tell you're all sitting on the edge of your seats, then you would like me to continue, right? So the rabbi might decide whether we should do that now, and if so, somewhere else. Maybe somebody should ask.
Even in big sanctuary.
Yeah.
Since everybody else in the room left
Okay, so I'm going to go on what the rabbi told me, which is we should continue, even if it's later than an hour. And if that's not true, then please somebody should ask him.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there an idea of when a person is named after someone that, like, a part of the neshama?
It's true that there's a Jewish custom of naming after, let's say, a departed relative or even a departed rabbi, tzaddik. And one of the reasons for that is that it establishes a spiritual connection between the two, and that's why it's important to name after a righteous person whose ways are worth emulating. But that doesn't happen in the way of reincarnation. It's more like a spiritual godfather, where that soul is almost kind of looking over the person who's named after him. There's an interesting question, which is how many times is a soul reincarnated? How many times? So there is a school of Kabbalists who say that a soul will be reincarnated 3 times for a total of 4 lifetimes, and that is consistent with what we've discussed until now, right? The idea of there being a first lifetime and then 3 consecutive lifetimes for a total of 4. So the first lifetime we'll call an incarnation, and the consecutive 3 would be called reincarnations. Okay, a total of 4 lifetimes. Other mystical sources, and one, for example, is the Sefer HaBahir, which is a very authoritative early Kabbalistic work, says, the Sefer HaBahir says that a person can be reincarnated 1,000 times. So is it 3 or is it 1,000? The Arizal brings 2 interesting reconciliations between that seeming contradiction. One answer that the Arizal gives is that a person is reincarnated for only 3 times if a person makes no spiritual progress. This is based on the verse which says that God does this with a man who has iniquity to bring him back from the pit of darkness to the light of the life, the light of the living, 3 times. It's based on the idea of reincarnation, therefore being 3 times. But he says the limit of 3 times is only if a person hasn't made any progress. So in the model that we explained until now, what would happen is the first incarnation, the person doesn't perfect himself. What happens? He's reincarnated another time for nefesh, another time for ruach, another time for neshama. Suppose he makes no perfection or progress whatsoever. The result of that is going to be a spiritual 3 strikes and you're out. Yeah? That would limit reincarnation to 3 times. However, the source which tells us the person reincarnated 1,000 times is talking about when a person is making progress, but eeny, weeny, teensy, weensy little progress. Incremental progress. As long as the soul is making progress, it can go on and on and on for 1,000 times. So that would be the way of reconciling. 3 times, no progress. Progress, even 1,000 times. Another way of reconciling the difference is 3 times is referring to being reincarnated as a human being. As the verse says, God does this with a man 3 times to bring him from the pit of darkness to the light of the living. As a man, 3 times. But if a person doesn't rectify what's needed in the form of human reincarnation, then a person could be reincarnated thousands of times in non-human form. Okay? And that would be called transmigration. What does that mean? The soul is migrating across the human plane to another plane, a non-human plane. And that could take place in the form of animals, plants, inanimate objects, stones, water. Okay? What's important here to know, though, is that unlike reincarnation to human beings, where the soul fits into the body, such that the soul is not even aware of being a reincarnation because it's a natural environment of a human being, when a human soul is placed into an animal, it's in a foreign element. And in fact, it's not the human soul which is the soul of an animal. It's important to know. The soul has its own animal soul, its own nefesh. The human soul is piggybacking that animal. So that a soul is reincarnated into a cow, for example, doesn't mean that the human soul is the soul of the cow. What it means is the human soul is associated with that cow. Okay? And lives a bovine existence. Okay? Why does that happen? If the purpose is to perfect the soul, how is being in a cow going to help? What can happen to the soul? So the answer is, if the person messed up so badly, they ruined the opportunity that was given by God to be reincarnated as a human being, and they lived as an animal. They didn't capitalize on the opportunity they were given as human beings, the elevated status to make their soul transcend in the spiritual realm. They basically lived like animals. You want to live like an animal? See what it's like to live like an animal. Now this soul is associated with an animal, and the soul is aware of being out of place. It sets that soul into a trajectory of remorse and regret, and that is very important for rectifying the soul. God sees the suffering of the soul there, and over time, God will interact in order to help this soul along. But the point is as follows. This soul made no active attempt to perfect itself. Now it's forced to be in a passive state where it cannot affect its change at all. That's mida keneged mida. What can happen, the Arizal tells us, in such a scenario is, let's take a soul being reincarnated in a stone. Okay? It's waiting there passively for who knows how long. The remorse of that soul is eventually heard upon by God. God has mercy and sets that stone into motion. It becomes a rolling stone. Who knows, maybe Mick Jagger's reincarnation. Right? The stone starts rolling into the grass, for example. The soul will then jump, we're told, from the stone into the grass, and now it's in the grass. It's been elevated from an inanimate to plant. That plant might be eaten by an animal. When that plant is eaten by an animal, let's say grass, it might be eaten by a non-kosher animal, it might be eaten by a kosher animal. If it's eaten by a kosher animal, for example, that kosher animal is roaming, but eventually it might be consumed. It might be consumed by a person who performs mitzvot, it might be not. If the person performs mitzvot, he might use that cow, for example, for a Shabbos meal. When he performs the mitzvah of the Shabbos meal with his meat, the mitzvahs are actually elevating the soul. And at that point, it becomes elevated into the guf, the spiritual repository that we spoke about. And at that point, the decision will be made. Was the rectification enough that it can stay in the spiritual realm, either through Gehinnom or Gan Eden, or does it have to go through reincarnation again? If reincarnation, it could be recalibrated so that it goes back into human form. The experience of being transmigrated ingrains within that soul a certain impetus such that if it's reincarnated in human form, it's much more likely to take advantage of the opportunity and not waste it like an animal, right, in the previous reincarnation. This would be an example of transmigration. In order to ramp up, we'll just talk about some other interesting cases. For example, can a Jew be reincarnated as a non-Jew, or the other way around? Can a non-Jew be reincarnated as a Jew? Or what about a man? Can a man be reincarnated as a woman, or a woman as a man? Right? These types of things. So this is an interesting discussion, but generally speaking, the idea is that women are not reincarnated as men. And the reason for this is because every human being, Jew, non-Jew, male, female, has a unique spiritual purpose. A soul will not be reincarnated into a person whose purpose is different than what that soul is earmarked for. And we all know that Jewish women do not have the same obligation in Torah study and the performance of mitzvahs as men do. And therefore, a woman's soul, generally speaking, there are some exceptions, but generally speaking, will not be reincarnated in a male's body. That soul will not be able to reach its purpose there. However, the opposite is possible. A male soul can be reincarnated into a female body. That body can't help that soul achieve all of its potential, but it can nevertheless be a result of a person's decisions. So that if a man, for example, chose to live his life in some way or the other as a woman, that person's rectification might actually have to be going through life as a male soul in a female body, feeling quite out of place and not able to achieve its potential in that way, and therefore help it get back on track the next reincarnation. Do you follow? Yeah? So that would be that topic. What about a Jew and a non-Jew? So the same principle that we said earlier would apply here as well. Generally speaking, a non-Jew will not be incarnated or reincarnated into a halachically Jewish person. Why? That non-Jew, who has a very unique and special, important spiritual task, is nevertheless different than that of a Jew. It would be incorrect to have that person be placed in the body of someone who's responsible for doing things which are different than this soul is programmed for, is earmarked for. And therefore, a non-Jew will generally not be reincarnated into the body of a Jew. However, it can work the other way around. A Jewish soul can be reincarnated into a Jewish body. Into a non-Jewish body, thank you. Yeah? And reasons, and the reason for this, for example, might be that if a Jew lived his life consciously as a non-Jew, let's say a Jew decided to convert out of Judaism, even though of course that's not possible. A Jew cannot become a non-Jew. But the person repudiates Judaism and ascribes to another religion. So in order to rectify the wrong of that decision, the soul might be reincarnated into the body of a non-Jew. The rectification will be this non-Jew's proactive decision to become Jewish. And in this way, rectify the decision to opt out. Now he's opting in. The person's body, from a halakhic point of view, is not Jewish. Correct? But the soul is. That's not enough. What happens is that this soul has to make the decision to opt in and convert. And the Kedushas Levi actually writes that this is a main reason, an impetus for righteous converts. These are actually Jewish souls who have been reincarnated as non-Jews, and they have this drive, this inkling, to convert. And pardon me?
What if they don't convert?
If such a person doesn't convert, so then they haven't capitalized on the opportunity they were given, being reincarnated, and then they have to be reincarnated again and again and again. But God is merciful, and God brings opportunities for this soul to capitalize upon.
There's a lot of different opinions where did the guy was off from?
Yeah, the Kedushas himself says that this is only one of the reasons. Of course, there are altruistic converts who convert simply because they find truth in Judaism. But this is another interesting dynamic. And I'll just conclude with another interesting story about the Chazon Ish. I believe it was the Chazon Ish. There was a young Jewish man who came from a very good family, a learned family, a well-respected family, a family that was well-to-do. And so as far as normal, practical considerations are concerned, he should have been a very eligible candidate to find his soulmate, his wife. But year after year went by, until 20 became 30, and 30, right, became 40. And he finds himself without a soulmate. So finally he goes to the Chazon Ish and he says, I don't understand what's going on. People tell me that as far as Al Derech Teva, practical concerns, I'm decent looking, I come from a good family, well-to-do. Why haven't I been married? He says, listen, I'm going to give you an answer, but it's on condition you ask no questions. Right? Jews answer questions by asking questions, no Jewish questions. Yeah? My answer, period, amen, you go. He says, okay. He says, listen, your soulmate, you have one, but she hasn't been born yet. What question is like raising in his throat? Wait, I'm 40 and she hasn't been born yet. So even if I wait till she's like 12, okay, bat mitzvah age, that means I'm going to be 52, and if I wait till she's 20, I'm going to be 60? I know what you want to ask. Don't ask any questions. Close his lips and he leaves. He's happy to get an answer, but he doesn't understand. Within a year, he comes to the Chazon Ish. I deserve a mazel tov. I became a chassan. What happened in the 20 years? The rabbi said his soulmate hadn't been born yet. The rabbi said, I hope you understand now my answer. What happened? The rabbi saw that this person's soulmate was actually a Jewish soul which was in a non-Jewish body, and she was still in the process of conversion. But he saw that she would soon convert, and we know our sources tell us that a convert is like a newborn child. So he said, you have a soulmate. She hasn't been born yet, meaning she hasn't converted yet. But within the year she converted, they met and they married, and they had a mazel tov. So you see from here some interesting permutations of the idea of reincarnation and the different forms that can take, and how that can be manifested in certain types of unique scenarios. And it's interesting, there is such a thing. Of course, intermarriage is a problem, but we still find that there are couples who are moving towards marriage in an intermarriage type fashion. Is it possible that they're soulmates? The answer is yes, it is possible that they're soulmates under the proper conditions, which the story that I told would indicate. And that's type of a practical ramification applicable today. So let's end here. I've enjoyed the talk, and we'll stay afterwards for questions and answers if you'd like. Thank you very much.